Welcome. This is Tasemere, your host of the Blackout live from New York. For folks who haven't tuned into this segment before on blackusa.news, this is a segment designed to celebrate Black folks across the diaspora and to have an open dialogue about Black economics, how we reimagine trends in business, and explore the magic that we have. So, some episodes ago, I spoke about venture capital, right? And we got into this whole conversation around acquisitions, mergers, and franchises. So, I wanted to bring a special guest that I have all the way from Georgia to talk about just what does this whole ecosystem mean. So, I have with me today Tanya Oskinski, who is a results-driven, proactive, and skilled business attorney. She's not only recognized she not only recognizes legal risk, but also knows how to intelligently manage them. Tanya brings solutions that create business value. She takes the time to understand each client's business and works with the client to develop and execute business strategies while reducing risk and legal liability. I know that was a mouthful.
Thank you, Tasemere, so much for having me and for that wonderful introduction.
No problem. I wanted to just, thank you for taking the time because I know you're in a few other states than I am right now. But I think that this is such an important topic for us to get into because I really met you on LinkedIn. I've been following you, following your content, following your posts. And it has really been very enlightening to me because some things I hadn't even thought about. And I work with businesses, but I don't work with them on acquisitions or mergers or franchises. And so to me, that's a whole nother bag of worms when you get into operations, legal, finance, right? And I can only imagine that that also plays a role in venture capital when people are selling equity, buying equity, merging companies together, all of that stuff. So I was so excited when you decided that, yes, you were going to come on the show because I think that this is valuable information. So before I get into all the questions that I have about that, how did you even get into this space? Like, this is such a unique position for attorneys. How did you even get into this space?
Well, thank you, first of all, so much for having me. And I am super excited to share what, little bit I know with the audience. And I appreciate you giving me this opportunity. So I went to law school back in the 90s, thinking I was just going to be regular, lawyer. And when I came out, it was during a recession. So there were very, few jobs, very difficult to get a job. And the first job I got was working for Georgia Tech here in Atlanta as an in-house lawyer, which exposed me to this world of being an in-house lawyer and working with inside the business, really getting to know that one business versus attorneys who work for law firms and have many clients and they have to spread their knowledge among different clients. I was lucky enough to just have one, and it was very interesting. And it was a great springboard to other corporate roles. From Georgia Tech, I went on to into the private sector and worked in other corporations like MCI and Georgia Pacific. So I was in this role with lots of business happening. These companies were doing a lot of buying and selling of companies. So I got to have a really close-up view of those transactions for the big guys, right? When there's a whole team of lawyers, on one deal. And about 5 years ago, I decided to go out on my own so I can bring that level of experience to the smaller businesses who can't afford a whole team of big law firm lawyers. And so I work on much smaller transactions now, not quite as big, but also just as important to those clients, if not more important. to those clients that I represent now.
So, what are some of the topics that come across your desk with small startups, I guess you could say, or just small businesses in general? What are some of the topics that come up?
So the topics that come up are usually things about liability when they're first starting out. And I think you and I talked about this when startups are getting their stuff together and planning for their, big dreams. They come up with a budget for marketing. They come up with a budget for, sales and advertising, but they almost never consider budgeting for legal, budgeting for taxes, and all these other kind of boring things, but are so important. Compliance, legal, taxes, all of those things can make your business disappear if not done right. So it's just as important to budget for them up front. And so when I work with startups, that is one of the first things that I address. Have you budgeted enough money to take care of these important things? And usually they do, so that's great, but not always.
Yeah, because I hear a lot of them are budgeting for LegalZoom, right? They're like, oh, I'll just do it on LegalZoom, or
right.
I'll Google some contract and like copy and paste it and just change the name, right?
Yes, all the time. I see this almost every single day, if or a week at least. And unfortunately, with Zoom, and it's fine for some very limited circumstances, but not for most circumstances. And what's happened, and you can ask any other lawyer who does business law, is that LegalZoom and companies like LegalZoom, because there's others like it, and I don't want to pick on LegalZoom, but they are a great source of business for lawyers because they do things wrong so much and they create so many problems that basically you've saved money up front, or you think you've saved money up front going to a company like that, but it was done so badly that you'll end up spending a lot more money trying to fix those problems later than you would have spent if you just engaged a real lawyer who can give legal advice from the beginning. LegalZoom and companies like that are just companies that provide a service, but they cannot provide legal advice, right? They are not attorneys. So if there is any issue and you didn't get legal advice from a licensed lawyer, it's the same as, having some bookkeeper do your taxes who's not a CPA. If they screw something up, it's basically buyer beware, right? And if that person is not licensed and doesn't have the right experience to give advice, you're just going to be out of luck if they mess it up.
I am so glad you mentioned that, because I was in a conversation with a friend of mine, and we usually have this conversation a lot, that a lot of people think that because they can give advice that they're experts, right? So maybe they read a lot of books, maybe they went to YouTube University, maybe they practiced something on themselves and it worked, right? And so now they're like, oh, you can do it like this and you can do it like that. And it might sound really good because maybe they're putting in some of those buzzwords that people are used to hearing. But when it gets down to the meat and potatoes, it doesn't cut the mustard, right? And so to bring this back and focus around mergers and acquisitions and franchises, that's a whole nother level of business, right? So like business comes in different forms and fashions. And I think people also throw those terms around. So can you just give a very basic definition of what those three different types of businesses are?
Sure. Well, franchises are, very specific regulated kind of business. So if you think of a franchise like, Subway, Sandwich Shop, or McDonald's, someone came up with this concept and then they license their intellectual property, their processes, their operating system to other business people to kind of to get a piece of that. And that's called a franchise, and that's just a very basic kind of definition. And it's not as easy as people think, right? First of all, franchises are very highly regulated. You can't just say, I'm giving you a franchise. There's a lot of regulations that have to be complied with that are very complex. There have to be disclosures that are provided to each person and so on. And if any business owner out there is thinking of franchising their business idea, you need to budget at least $10,000 to $20,000 just for legal fees alone to prepare that package. So it's very, very expensive. And then on the back end, if you want to become a franchisee, in some company that is giving you that license, you have to realize that this is not your business. You're basically getting the right to use that company's trademarks and names, but they don't belong to you. At any time when that relationship ends, you are basically left with nothing. You're basically buying a job for yourself, which there's nothing wrong with doing that, but realize that this is not something that you will own forever and ever, as if you came up with your own business idea. Right. So mergers and acquisitions are just this, term of art. It's basically when a business decides to buy or sell another business. People talk about mergers like it's a thing, and very rarely it is a thing. Usually what people do is either buy a company outright or not. So mergers, which is what you just envision, like we're merging together and we're equal and we're going to be running the whole thing together. That pretty much never happens, right? Because somebody has to be in charge. So usually it's an acquisition. So despite the name, it's usually just an acquisition. And that is when one business buys another business.
I'm so glad that you made that distinction, because I've been hearing mergers and acquisitions, and I think what happens is that whether you are like someone that is sitting in business all the time, or you're just someone that watches business as it happens, right? You're thinking, okay, this is what's happening on the stock market. And I heard that this major company just like bought up this other company. And it seems like these things happen so quickly. And I think that as someone that doesn't sit in that space, right, you're like, oh, I can just, I've had clients come to me and say, I'm going to start a franchise. And I'm like, huh? Right? And they're like, I'm going to start a franchise because I have a really great business. And I think that somebody's going to want to franchise it. And I know not as much as you do, but I'm like, I think those are a lot of steps, right? Like, yes, you got to secure the IP.
Yeah, it takes at least 10 or 20,000 just for legal fees alone, and probably several weeks or months at least. Those are the minimum times. It could take a lot longer and be a lot more expensive than that to create a true franchise. And that doesn't mean somebody's actually going to want to buy it, right? So you have to do all of that before you even have somebody who is willing to shell out the money for it. So it's a lot. And it's the same thing like when you are ready to sell your business. People think, oh, I got this thing built up. I got a couple of contracts. I'm going to find a buyer and sell, and I'll be sitting pretty on some beach drinking a margarita. Well, it almost never works like that, right? In real life, in the real world, it takes a long time. If you have to build up your business to be sellable, right? It has to have a history of revenue and ongoing revenue, recurring revenue. And then it usually takes, I would say, between 3 to 5 years to prepare your business properly for a sale. You have to have all your contracts documented to raise that value. Otherwise, yeah, sure, somebody can buy it real cheap, but you want to raise that purchase price. You're going to prepare it really well. You want to make sure your financials are super clean, all your books and records, all your contracts are in writing, all of your corporate documents are set, all of your intellectual property rights are clear, all of those things. And that takes time. And then, the marketing of the business may take time. And then the buyer will come in and they'll want to examine everything. They'll want to take a deep dive into all of your financials and all of your books and records. And then there will be a period of negotiation of the purchase agreement, which is the last step. So before I'm even involved, at the last stage, there are potentially years of work that need to be done to get the company ready for a sale. So it's something that, takes time to prepare if you want to sell at a good price.
Now, what about this whole VC world? And people are saying, like, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to raise money. I'm going to get like a angel investor or some sort of investor, right?
Yeah, it's a complicated world, and I'm sure you've seen, like, there's some shows out right now on some TV shows that have come out that deal with this. It's a crazy world. It's very complicated, and again, on these shows and movies, they make it sound like, yeah, I'm gonna have this guy agreed to be my angel investor. Now the deal's done. Or just like in Shark Tank. Well, what they don't show on Shark Tank is the hundreds of pages of contract language that have to be agreed to get that completed. And the fact that you are giving up usually a lot of your equity in the company. So to get this kind of money coming in sounds really great, but it's not all roses, right? There's a lot of things that you give up to get that money, and you have to be rational and realistic when you think about that, because people don't think about, okay, I've got all these great investments and millions of dollars, but now I have a minority interest in my company. So next thing you turn around, the board doesn't like something you've done and you're out, and that company you started, you're no longer a part of it. That would be a terrible thing to happen.
Yeah, it would be. Again, this is echoing conversations that I've had recently, because I think that people, again, that aren't sitting in this spot all day, every day, they are seeing things happening and they're trying to figure out, what is my role in the business ecosystem? Yeah. And they cherry pick something and they think that, like, this is going to be it, without understanding. Like, while you were talking, I heard nothing but legal folks and different types of legal folks and accounting, right? Like, forget the marketer, the brander, like that. Those people weren't in my mind. I thought contract attorneys, trademark attorneys, copyright attorneys, right?
Yes.
So valuations, right? Like, who's going to value? How do you even get to valuating the business at a fair market value? What does that even mean? How do you evaluate potential, right? Like, you built something, but now you have potential that it can grow. That takes a long time to come up with that number. Yeah. But these are people that you have to pay all along the way.
That's right. And it is so important that a business owner surround themselves with the right advisors who are neutral, not someone who is going to benefit from getting your business personally, right? Not some marketing person who's just selling you, but people who are completely neutral. They get paid no matter whether you win or lose, so they're not going to be biased. People like accountants, people who are just looking at the numbers, because you know what? Numbers don't lie, right? If it's a great deal, the numbers will show it. If it's not, the numbers will show it. People like valuation experts are critical because they live in the real world, right? They're not living in the marketing world, which is a little bit skewed of reality. So as a business owner, it's really important to surround yourself and have the marketing people there too, because they inspire you, they make you feel great. But in the end, at the end of the day, you need to be realistic. You have to look at things the way they are, and not and then and be prepared for not just the upside, but also for the downside, right? A smart business person looks at both, and you have to understand what the downside can be so that you can mitigate it. If you're only looking at the upside, you are opening yourself up to all kinds of stuff. If you understand the downside, and unfortunately that means people like me who are always looking out for the downside, but at least then you know what you can do. You can mitigate downside. You can do other things to remove those the percentage of effect that it may have. But without looking at it, you don't even know what it could be.
So as a mergers acquisition franchise attorney, do you think this is something that newbies can get into? I mean, like, I don't want to just say people can't do it, but do you think that there's a certain breadth of experience that's needed to understand these complex business models and structures? Or do you think that there's leeway for someone who comes right out of law school this year and they say, I'm going to just start this merger acquisition franchise boutique firm? How do you negotiate that? Because I think that there's so many people starting businesses.
Yeah.
And there's some people that have tons of experience. There's some people that are just very green in their exposure period. But because this is so complex, this is something that has so many different moving parts.
Yeah.
What would be, not legal advice, but what would be some things that business owners should look for when they're scouting for this kind of expert?
They should look for someone with a lot of experience. I can't speak for all lawyers, but for me, when I got out of law school, I knew absolutely nothing. Okay. And I am still learning today. I've been a lawyer for over 25 years, and I'm still learning every single day because things are constantly evolving. Law is getting a lot more complex every day. There's new things coming out. There's new developments in the world all the time. So if I was a business owner looking for help, I would definitely look for someone with at least 15 to 20 years of experience doing that particular area of law. I wouldn't hire someone who is a generalist who says that I do wills and I do contracts and I do personal injury and all of this stuff. Nobody can do all of those things well, right? It's very, very specialized. And it's getting more and more specialized as time goes on because of the complexity. So definitely need someone with at least 10, 15 years of experience, if not more.
Now, what about this NFT business? How is this impacting what you do? Because people are doing this Bitcoin, this NFT.
It doesn't affect me at all because I don't accept that, right? I think of it as pure speculation. I'm a pretty conservative person. Maybe there are lawyers out there who will accept that, but it's too risky for me personally. I am not backed up by a huge firm, and I'm not a bank, so I don't do business that way. But I understand that business is getting done that way, but it is a risk. Like I said, you have to evaluate your own risk sensitivity, your own ability to take risk, and what would happen if you accept a deal that is being paid in just or something like it. You have to be willing to. You have to be ready for the situation where you get nothing, right? If that possibility is acceptable to you,
yeah, because I'm just there's so many different multi layers of what's happening, and this complex ecosystem that is business. For me, I work predominantly with people that have ideas all the way to people that are looking for pre-seed funding on just the business plan, right? That's all that I do. I haven't stepped into mergers, acquisitions, and franchises because that's like just a whole nother ball of worms. Do you find that you have to help change the business model or the business structure when people are looking at that as being an option?
What do you mean by?
Do you find that from a legal standard, like let's say someone comes to you with a cleaner's business, right? And they're like, hey, Tanya, I want to, merge this or get rid. I'm tired of the business. I don't have anybody in my family that wants to take it over. So there's no succession plan. I just want to get rid of it, right? And then at that point, do you find that sometimes the business model has to be tweaked to be more profitable for it to be sellable, or are business owners tend to be very focused on how they're driving their revenue? So when they get to this point, like all they have to do is work with you to make the sell.
Yeah, very rarely they only have to work with me because I am just a lawyer, right? They have to get their financial house in order before I can even help. And usually it would be very difficult to find a buyer for a business if your financials are not in good order. And I spoke with a client a few months ago who was, not willing to get advice on the financial side and had a potential buyer who was willing to buy stuff. So he hired me to just buy. Well, the contract ended up being taking so long that the whole thing kind of fell through. It fell apart. The buyer walked away. But then my client was like, I have nothing else. I'm just going to walk away. He made the decision instead of trying to build it up and try to sell it again, that he was just going to leave and walk away entirely.
Oh my gosh. He just said, I'm done and I'm just gonna close the business.
He was exhausted and tired and just walked away from the whole thing. So that is like the worst case scenario, right? And that's, so that's why I was saying you have to prepare for a long time, sometimes even years, to get the business to the point where it's attractive to a buyer, so that a buyer would want to buy it and pay good money for it. I have another client who had a retail business and really struggled with COVID. When COVID hit, he practically had to shut down for a long time. He was on the verge of going bankrupt last year. Then earlier this year, some company came in and offered to buy him out for $2 million. So he managed to stick it out through the bad times, getting the PPA loans, the PPP loans, and just managed to hold on. And then a buyer just came and offered him an incredible amount of money that he never even imagined. So it's being persistent and being serious and sticking around a lot of times,
Yeah, I mean that takes the grit of a business owner, right? Like you can't run when things get hard or seem to be getting hard. That's really interesting, but I think it's because sometimes people look to you at the very last minute, right? They're like, make this happen tomorrow because I can't do this anymore. And they haven't really looked at the full scope of the team that they need to have in place. And so I think oftentimes when people start, they have no team. It's just them. They are the team. Maybe along the way they develop a remnant of a team, but that's usually not enough. Like the people that they have aren't usually enough to help make very critical decisions, right?
Right. Because they're penny wise and pound foolish, right? They want their, brother-in-law who does, taxes for H&R Block to to give them advice on and selling their business. Well, you have to have people on your team who are strategic thinkers, who are experienced in exactly what the situation you're facing in your business, who can give you advice that's actually going to add value. And even though you have to pay them, the value you'll get far exceeds what you have to pay for those services.
Yeah. I totally agree. So before we wrap up, because I don't want to take so much more of your time, how do people find a business acquisition and merger attorney? How do they find them? And then how do people connect with you if people have questions? This is a show that is on a network that has folks from all over the world watching. So there's likely someone in Georgia that might say, hey, I need this advice. I just want to be able to set myself up for success. So how do they find you or someone like you if they can't work with you?
So I'm online at www.osenskilaw.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn at Tanya Osensky, and I'm happy to connect with anyone who wants to reach out. If anyone out there who is not in Georgia and would like to talk to a lawyer, I'm happy to reach out to my network to try to find a lawyer in their state who does what I do. And barring that, ask any other lawyer you know. Lawyers are great at connecting people with other lawyers who are of a different, practice area. So if you know and trust a good lawyer, or your accountant, or someone who works in the business kind of community, who is kind of at least tangentially involved in these kind of transactions, ask them for a referral. And ask for multiple referral, interview people, see who you feel comfortable with, and then you just have to try them out.
Well, I can just tell you, I love your content on LinkedIn.
Thank you.
For me, LinkedIn is my platform of choice, although I am also on Instagram. But I love LinkedIn, and your posts are always so insightful. And the stories that you tell without blasting clients is just around the core issue or concern of I read something, I don't remember when you posted it, but something around contracts. And it was almost like two brothers, or they were definitely related, and they didn't have a contract in place. One person, thought they were giving a loan, and the other person thought that they were buying into the company, and then the company dissolved. And it was a whole big mess because emotions got into the middle of it. And there was no way to really determine who was actually more right? Which to me spoke to the importance of, forget acquisition, mergers, and franchises, but everything needs to be a contract. A contract with clear terms. And if, even if you don't feel comfortable going to an attorney, at some point, just write down what you think. Right? And then get it polished, right? So I really enjoy your content on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Thank you.
No problem. I found you. I slid into that message. Folks, sliding into messages still work. You're able to genuinely connect with people in this virtual space and discover and explore synergies. But thank you so much. Feel free to stop by anytime.
Well, thank you.
Feel free to stop by anytime. I had such a great time talking with you today.
You
Folks,
too.
this is Tasemere from the Blackout live from New York. We talked about acquisitions, franchises, mergers, a little bit about contracts, a little bit about who your team should be so you can plan a little bit more strategically. And again, thank you so much, Tanya, for taking the time.
Thanks, Tasemere.